Hi everyone, this is going to be a very quick video on the background to the Human Rights Act 1998, and it'll include any information you might need to know for the introduction or background paragraphs for an essay on the Human Rights Act or even on the Bill of Rights. So in order to understand the Human Rights Act and even understand the arguments for a British Bill of Rights, we need to know about the European Convention of Human Rights. So this was created in 1950 and came into force in 1953. It was created by a group called the Council of Europe, which was set up after World War II in order to avoid any human rights atrocities like what happened with Nazis in the Holocaust. So the European Convention was actually originally proposed by Winston Churchill and drafted mainly by British lawyers. This is a really interesting point to note because if you're doing a essay on the British Bill of Rights and you're talking about possibly moving away from the convention, some politicians want to move away, some people want to stay. Theresa May, for example, did say at one point that she wanted to move away from the European Convention because she wanted this British law, this British Bill of Rights. You could actually argue that the European Convention is based on British values because it was written by British lawyers, proposed by Winston Churchill, a very famous British Prime Minister. So that's an interesting point to note there. So the Convention consists of a number of articles which protect the basic human rights, things like right to a fair trial, right to life, freedom of expression, right to privacy, all the ones we've had a look at in lessons. So the UK made these rights part of its domestic law through the Human Rights Act 1998. So the Human Rights Act incorporated the European Convention of Human Rights into domestic law. Before we go straight into the Human Rights Act, though, let's have a look at what life was like before 1998. So previously in the UK, our human rights have been protected by the traditional idea of residual rights. In other words, an individual is able to do anything that is not otherwise prohibited in law. The same goes for the state. The state is allowed to do anything they want as long as it's not prohibited in law. However, this had many flaws, and the flaws of residual rights were apparent in the case of Malone and Met Police. And this found that a state may violate an individual's human rights if that action is not prohibited in law. Obviously, that is very weak protections on human rights, things like right to privacy, for example. Thankfully, the law has moved on since then with the introduction of the Human Rights Act. So the Human Rights Act 1998 was introduced by Tony Blair's government to, quote, bring rights home. It incorporated the European Convention on Human Rights into domestic law. This means that all of the protections under the European Convention, so things like the right to life, right to a fair trial, freedom of expression, right to privacy, can be relied upon in a domestic court. So you can, as an individual, go to a domestic court or a tribunal in the UK and say, for example, a police station or a police officer has interfered with my right to privacy unjustifiably. Okay, you are able to go to a tribunal, you are able to go to a court if you feel like a public authority has interfered with your rights. This means that the protections of human rights in the UK increased with the introduction of this Act. The argument then comes about with the British Bill of Rights. Obviously, I won't go into depth in this because it's just an introduction or just background information. But the argument is now that we should, in Britain, have a British Bill of Rights. We are one of very, very few democratic countries that don't have a written constitution. Our constitution relies on statute law and common law. We don't have, like in America, a written constitution with all of our rights laid down in that. So there have been arguments for a British Bill of Rights which would repeal the Human Rights Act, and this would be entrenched. This would be very difficult to repeal, which some would argue improves or increases our protection on human rights. At the moment, we are uncertain as to what this means. The Conservative Party have put out some guidance on it. You can have a look at that. It's all on the government website. And it is something that has been kind of on people's minds, on the radar for politicians for quite a while now. And it is coming back into play now. Everything with COVID and Brexit has calmed down. So there have been some more talks about the introduction of a British Bill of Rights by the Conservative Party. So that is a very quick introduction as to the Human Rights Act, the history of it, so the European Convention of Human Rights, and possibly the future of it as well, with a British Bill of Rights being introduced. Possibly. See you next time. Thanks.